Hello and welcome to the next episode of the CAH podcast. Today's a really exciting episode where I get to sit down with our current president, Jo Richardson, to reflect on her long career in housing and to look ahead to her epic walk along the coastal path where she hopes to raise money for her charity Homeful. Jo, hi, thank you so much for joining me today. Really exciting to get the opportunity to talk to you about all things housing, about your presidential campaign. So welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased to be part of this new podcast series, James.
First of all, then, Jo, so president of CAH. I mean, that's a big deal. Can you just tell me where you were when you found out the news?
I was on my way home from work. So it was towards the end of the day, lovely, bright day. I was not anticipating winning, I have to say. As soon as I realised who I was up against, the fabulous Jim Ripley, I thought, I haven't got a prayer. A very popular chief executive of a London housing association. It's definitely not going to happen. But, you know, I've gone in for it. I'm a great one for feeling the fear and doing it anyway. So I thought, well, I've had a go. I've run a reasonable campaign, but I don't have a chance. I think actually what made it happen is that I've been teaching for 20 years, housing students across the UK. And I think that was probably where my constituency of voters came from. But I was absolutely thrilled, astonished and thrilled. So yes, I was very excited. I got the phone call, couldn't quite believe it, and thought, gosh, after all these years of working in housing, being a housing lecturer in my more recent years, this is quite quite a privilege. I also felt very daunted. You know, when you think you want something and then you get it and you think, crikey, can I live up to this? So I think partly because, you know, Jim Strang, Aileen Evans, Alison Inman, these are heavyweights of the housing world. And maybe partly because I felt slightly on the cusp of that in housing academia, albeit very much applied and working with practitioners. I thought, how on earth am I going to live up to that? So all of those emotions were going through my head, but mostly I thought, wow, this is going to be quite an exciting time, and what a privilege to be in this position and to be representing the views of the membership of the CIH. Fantastic.
So you've ascended to housing's Mount Rushmore. Those other fantastic names from CIH's presidential past.
Absolutely.
You've talked there really eloquently about what it means to you to be president of the professional body. So I think it would be really nice now to just understand a little bit about your housing journey, how you came to do what you do, what the drivers are, what the motivations have been for you. So it's quite an open-ended question, and then just feel free to take that where you want, really.
Well, thank you. I am definitely someone who says that they chose housing as a career. And I know that housing is one of these things that grabs people, whether they mean to enter the sector or not. But I found a way of entering the housing sector very purposefully. And that's partly, and I've talked about this a bit before, so excuse me for repeating myself, but it's partly because of an experience I had in my late teens. I went to America for a year. I had a scholarship to go to school there for a year. So I did senior year of high school, which was a fascinating experience of itself. But we were encouraged prior to spring break for a month to do a voluntary project. And myself and a fellow school pupil, we volunteered with New York City Relief. And this is a charity that provided food, advice and friendship really to people who were experiencing street homelessness in New York. At that point, that's what I imagined homelessness was. I now know that that's just really the tip of the iceberg. There are many other ways of being homeless, but it was such an eye-opener. It was in spring 1991, so quite a while ago now. It was before Mayor Giuliani had really gentrified the streets of New York, so it felt very gritty. It felt, it felt like the films I'd seen on TV. I hadn't anticipated that it would actually really be like that. And I was meeting people my own age, so and younger as well. I mean, people of all ages, but the thing that struck me was that the people of my age were worrying about where they would lay their head that night, where they would get their next meal. And I was busy thinking about whether I'd go to university, where my career would take me, what my future life would be like. I was full of dreams and aspirations that had really quite a long lead in, because that's what you do at that age, I thought. And so I was meeting people who couldn't think in that way because the immediate future was at such threat for them. They had no security, no space, I guess, for thinking that way. And it struck me because I've come from a very, very stable family background. I moved once when I was 2, so I don't remember it. So I've always had that place to call home. Totally took it for granted. I mean, partly it's the selfishness of being a teenager, but partly because it was always there and I knew it was there. Knew my family was there as well. So had never really thought about it in an abstract way, had never thought critically about what home meant to me until I was there talking with other people who didn't have that. And I just thought, this is something that struck me. And I thought, this is something I want to do. Thinking about my future career, this is a place I'd like to be. I would like to contribute in my career service to the public sector. And I'd like to do something around home. And so I went, did a public administration degree, did a placement year in my 3rd year with a local authority. Got a chance to work with the housing team and decided at that point that I would apply for a job there after I'd finished my degree. So then became a housing assistant, did my test of professional practice alongside doing my master's. So this would have been the mid-90s, and it was back in the day before sort of the proliferation of the internet, which my teenage son can't quite believe there was an age before the internet, but there really was. So it was I think it was a little green booklet that I rushed around the council with, showed it to different people and said, look, I need to do this. I need to tick off this job to show that I've got competency or a skill in this particular area. And it gave me a license to be nosy. So that then, once I'd got that, I then had skills in which I could apply for other jobs in the housing sector. So went to work for a housing association after that as a housing officer, just generic patch management, sort of mixed stock, 800 properties, bit of everything. And finished my master's degree and then saw a job come up in what was called the Good Practice Unit at the CIH. It was a job that was supported through a grant from the what was then the Department for Transport, Local Government and the Regions, now DLUC, and it enabled me to travel all around the UK, collecting examples of good practice, writing good practice briefings, getting to know the rest of the Good Practice Unit and the policy team. And it was fantastic. Again, a license to be nosy and find out what was going on. So that, that took me to, the end of the 90s, just the cusp of the millennium. And I then saw a role come up at De Montfort University. I'd been given an opportunity to do a bit of lecturing, found out that I was okay at it, enjoyed it, and then the opportunity to apply for a 1-year fixed-term contract managing what was then the Centre for Comparative Housing Research, which was directed by the brilliant Dr. Tim Brown, who was a fantastic mentor to me throughout my academic career. And realised this was something I would enjoy doing and would enable me to carry on working with housing practitioners, but also at that strategic educational level as well. So that's a bit of a ramble, but that's my housing journey.
No, that was fascinating and really interesting that you said it was a very conscious decision to move into housing rather than the fairly standard cliche that people say about falling into housing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was lots in there that I'm keen to pick up on. One of the, just thinking back to the early formative part of your housing experience in New York, one of the things I was really struck by when you talked about New York City Relief was it provided food, advice, and friendship for street homeless people. And I thought the friendship element was really fascinating there, because you often read about the fantastic work organisations don't necessarily have things as basic and as important as friendship in there. Can you just tell me a little bit about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think that's a word I've used as a bit of a coverall for what I saw. So if I tell you what New York City Relief did in totality, what I saw of it, basically we drove a bus in. The base, it's a religious charity as well. So I think a lot of charities that work in the homelessness space in New York at the time are connected with church or religion at some time. I would say I'm a spiritual person, but not hugely connected with institutional religion. So at times I asked myself questions about that, and I still do. But I saw that connection, probably through church, offered friendship. It wasn't contingent on accepting uh, a certain religious approach, but it allowed that space to make that human connection. And so I did see people who seemed to be soothed and supported through talking with the colleagues and volunteers that I worked with. That the other things that New York City Relief provided, the food, the sustenance, I think it all linked together. So the overarching feeling was one of friendship. So we saw people who were homeless, perhaps as a result of trauma following being veterans from the Vietnam War. At that point, it was still really quite fresh after the health epidemic of AIDS and HIV. We saw people who, yes, were malnourished, didn't have the right clothing. So what we did, I got up whilst I was volunteering with them, got up at sort of 4 a.m. We had these huge vats that we cooked soup for we could cater for up to sort of 800 people with these huge vats of soup. We then drove in, we collected bagels and bread rolls from bakeries who donated them on our journey into various locations. And that kind of combination, I think, of hot food, first aid type of approach, rebandaging wounds, providing a bit of clothing, a bit of housing support, a bit of signposting to other charities and other services, and just the time to stop and talk. And I think it was that, and I've seen that process partly through my role with World Habitat. I'm trustee with that charity, and seeing some of the examples that they've brought over, sort of housing first approaches, some of the approaches in the United States, just how important it is to stop and ask people their name, because I think otherwise people feel that they're treated as a number, they're part of a cohort of those in need. And I remember it, reading those examples now, I remember kind of seeing a light switch on in someone's eyes of at last someone stopping to ask who I am and how I am and what do I want, rather than just being treated as part of the system, really.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting and makes me reflect on the behaviour of society in general, but probably thinking about myself as well, and the extent to which we notice, particularly street homeless people, and whether when we see street homeless people, whether we fully reflect and take in what that person's going through, the reasons that they've ended up on the street. And I think I heard that saying, people are only ever a couple of paychecks away from finding themselves in real hardship. And it's just something I think we would all do well to reflect on, that human element. So that really struck a chord with me, Jo. I
think that it's an interesting point, and in some ways it's really important to remember that it's social policy failure that has resulted in homelessness for people. It's not some kind of a character flaw, or it's not something to do with the individual. But it's important as well to be very critical of this notion that we're all a couple of paychecks away from homelessness. And I think some of the stuff that Beth Watts and the team do at iSphere at Heriot-Watt University is really interesting. And if you look at the sort of things that Beth notices on social media and the comments that she has put, it's not quite true that we're all a couple of paychecks away from homelessness. As I mentioned, I've come from a very stable and loving family background. I have got 20 plus years of a career and some skills that I've developed that hopefully would make me re-employable if I needed to be re-employed. So all of these things create a sort of safety net, and that's not something that we all have equal access to. So whilst in a way it's very useful to say that, because it humanises the issue and it makes it very clear that it's not down to an individual. There are a whole range of complex reasons that have brought someone to homelessness, not least social policy failure. So whilst it's useful, it's important to remember it's not universally applicable. We're not all in that situation. We're not precariously on the edge of homelessness in any equal manner at all.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Joe. Thank you. I'll certainly reflect on that as well. I think it's important that we all do that. So bringing us up to date then. You're president of the CIH.
Yeah.
You have the respect and the admiration of your peers across the sector, and you have the opportunity as president to do something quite special. So I just wondered whether you could talk to us a little bit about the work that's going on around your presidency.
Yeah, thank you. So the campaign that I am running this year, so up until the end of 2022, it's called Homeful. And it's a made-up word. It's a mixture of home and hopeful, and an antonym to homeless. And I'm hoping it kind of conjures up a bit of a feeling that we can do this. We saw during the pandemic really agile, interdisciplinary responses, particularly to street homelessness. And actually, we saw a lot of ways in which organisations were agile. Things that IT projects that were penciled in to take 3 years suddenly happened over a weekend, sort of thing. So we knew that we could do stuff. And I think the social housing sector, at its best, can do amazing things. So partly because I was linking back to my time as well with the Good Practice Unit, which is all about collating and sharing examples. And I don't like the word best practice, because it imagines that there's one size fits all approach, like a silver bullet, and there isn't. There are a range of practices that can work in different contexts. And obviously in conversation with Gavin as chief exec of CIH, we talked about how I could kind of stick to the day job as well, in a way, and yet do something which would raise the profile of the responses that we had achieved during the pandemic. So Homeful is really about exploring housing-led approaches to resolving and preventing homelessness. I don't only mean housing first. There's some fantastic evaluation of the Housing First pilots. It's really important that Housing First is part of a mixed response to homelessness, but it's not the only game in town. There are other examples which work and that don't necessarily follow in a very high fidelity way all of those aspects of Housing First. I also wanted to think about prevention, some of the things that organisations are doing as part of their tenancy management that might be good practice for others to consider to prevent homelessness within our sector. We don't want to create a revolving door within our own sector. So I just thought, well, what have we done? What can we do? And what will we do? So I'm not a great one for pledges. I'm a bit more of an action than words, which is unusual, I guess, for an academic. So I just thought, well, what can we do to show what we can, what we have, and what we will do in terms of resolving and preventing homelessness. So we're going to have a couple of online surveys. I'd like local authorities and housing associations to fill in this at least once. We've got a survey which is for residents and tenants in the social housing sector, because I think it's so important to include the voice of lived experience. And as I say, we're not only looking at street homelessness, we're looking at where current accommodation is not fit for purpose as a home. So it could be there is something in the property that is not right in terms of disrepair. It could be that the house is working against a person if they've got physical needs that mean that their home is not working for them. It could be that someone feels in danger at home as a result of sort of domestic or family violence. So all of these are sort of contributory factors, and I'd like to pick up on examples where social housing providers are working to try and resolve this and prevent homelessness as a result of this. So that's a big part. That's the sort of action research piece. So in addition to the 2 surveys I've mentioned, we're going to take a very devolved methodological approach, a bit like Rethinking Social Housing that CIH ran a couple of years ago now. And there'll be a toolkit on the website that housing organisations can download. They can then facilitate workshops themselves. And I've talked to a couple of housing organisations who are very interested in doing this. So it doesn't require me or the research assistant I have working with me, with very kind support from organisations, including Morgan Sindall, Longhurst and Home Housing Association, and more recently, Seddon Builders have very kindly provided some sponsorship, which allows us to get participant vouchers to enable them to be supported to take part. So hopefully those workshops will include a range of stakeholders, and as I say, including the voice of lived experience, which is going to be so important. In addition to that, we are going to include a photo voice element, working with people of the streets. So we're collecting experience in different ways. Unbelievably, not everyone likes filling in surveys or being part of a focus group. So we're trying to collect those voices in different ways. So that's the action research bit.
Yeah.
And then there's a fundraising piece. And I'm doing a bit of a mad thing. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to set off on 46 consecutive days of walking. And this is to get 630 miles walked on the Southwest Coast Path. And that came about partly, I think, because during lockdown, we'd seen the positive impact that you can get from getting outdoors, connecting with nature, connecting with other people. And that really came through from Aileen Evans' fantastic campaign, Shining a Light on Mental Health. So I'd thought about that. I'd read books like Isabel Hardman's Natural Health Service, which I think is brilliant. But I'd also read the most amazing book called The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. And Raina talks about her story of her own homelessness. She and her husband become homeless and they walk the Southwest Coast Path. Her husband's also poorly at the start of the walk, but as he walks, he feels better. And I just thought this, for a start, it's a beautifully written book. And I thought I'd like to do something to honour that book. And it inspired me to think, although it sounds like really hard work in the Salt Path, I figured I'd give it a go. So that's what I'm doing. I've never done anything like it. I mean, who knows? Let's really hope I can do this, because people are very kindly sponsoring me. But all I can do is promise to set out, put one foot in front of the other, take it day by day, times 46, and hopefully start in Minehead and end up in Poole. And people can join in with this. So I know a couple of organisations who are very kindly sponsoring a day of the walk, and someone from their organisation may join me for a particular leg, a particular day. Others are joining together wherever they are. So there's a group of housing providers in Norfolk, for example, and they are sponsoring a day of the walk. And on that same day, they are all going to join together. So they've set up, or they're in the process of setting up on the Just Giving page, their own fundraiser. And they're going to walk bits of the Norfolk Coast Path at the same time as I'm walking in the Southwest. And anyone can do this. You know, if you're in Birmingham, walk along lengths of the canal. If you're in Scotland, walk in the Highlands. Wherever you are, you can do this, and it supports End Youth Homelessness, which is a collection of charities across the UK. So across the different regions in England and across all of the devolved countries of the UK, there are charities supporting young homeless people, which takes me right back to that inspiration from when I was 19. I really wanted to try and do something that helps support those young people experiencing homelessness. So again, a bit of a long rambling answer there, James, but that's Homeful. I'd say in a nutshell, but it's a very big nut.
Well, a bit of a ramble that finished with talking about a very long ramble.
Yes, indeed. I'm good at rambling.
600-mile ramble. Have you been able to do much training for that, Joe? Because it strikes me that that's a colossal undertaking.
It's huge, isn't it? I know, and I'm trying not to think about it in its totality. I've read Steve Peters' The Chimp Paradox, and at the moment, my chimp in my brain. For anyone who's not read it, it's it talks about how your brain works. My chimp is on full chat. It really is, and I'm trying to just quieten it down because at the moment it's saying, "What have you done? Why are you doing it? You can't do it." And so I'm trying to calm that down and remember that I have been training for about 9 months, and I started off kind of going back to the gym, and I did a few sort of aerobic sessions, quite high impact. And what that did was exacerbate an unknown arthritis in my foot, particularly in one foot, but I've got it in both feet. And so I injured my foot to the extent that it wasn't healing. And so I went and got this x-ray, and that's when they said, "Oh, yes, you've rather exacerbated this arthritis." So I thought, oh, goodness. I thought, I can't let that defeat me. What I can do is slightly change what I'm doing. I can reappraise the amount of miles I think I can cover in a day.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to cover too much in each day. I certainly can't do 22 miles a day. Like I live in the Midlands and I can do 22 miles in a day. I walk 22 miles on Saturday. It's not easy, but it's doable. So I reappraised that. So I'm walking fewer miles, but I realized that I can't do high impact training. So I changed my training routine and I'm doing much more around balance and strength. So I go to the gym 3 times a week. I do long walks at the weekend. I've definitely got fitter as a result, feeling stronger as a result. It's not helped. I had the foot injury at the start. I then fell at the beginning of this year and broke my wrist. Less than ideal. I managed to break 2 bones in my wrist and had to have an operation, but I came out of plaster a couple of weeks ago. I'm taking it easy with that, but I started walking with poles again at the weekend, which is good for the hills. So I'd never come across walking poles until I started this, and now I'm a total convert. I love them. And then a couple of weeks ago, I managed to get COVID-19 as well. So I'm rather hoping that I've had my 3 injuries.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that I am good to go now. Day one, I'll be fit and well and ready to go. But yeah, it's taken some work to get in better condition than I was before I started. But yes, it's a mental battle as much as it is a physical battle of trying to get over this voice in my head that says, "What on earth do you think you're doing?"
Well, I'm sure, and I'm sure listeners will probably think the same after you've outlined all the steps that you've had to get across to get to this point. I don't think anyone would doubt your determination, and to roll out a well-trodden sporting cliche. You really will have to take each day as it comes, won't you? I guess.
I really will, and I think something that is not to be underestimated is sheer belligerence, and I have that in spades. So yeah, bring it on.
Well, I think we would all wish you the best of luck with that, Joan. We look
you.
forward to hearing all about your progress. And as you said, there's plenty of opportunities for people to get involved through sponsorship to raise money for incredibly good cause. I think we're probably going to have to draw things to a close. Had a whole host of additional questions. So maybe what we should do is think about perhaps after your walk, perhaps getting you back on maybe towards the end of your time as president to reflect on the year and on what you've learned, because I'm sure people and listeners, and certainly I would love to hear from you and talk to you again.
I'd love to do that. I mean, there will be moments, hopefully at the conference at the end of June, there'll be some sort of launch event, possibly in the Midlands, possibly at my university at the end of the year. There'll be a report. I'll do a few bits and pieces as well on the website to share the lessons as they emerge. But it would be lovely to do a catch up with you. I think I perhaps answer in a very meandering way. So apologies if I've talked a bit too much and we've not fitted all the questions in, but yeah, a follow-up conversation would be great.
Yeah, no, it's been lovely. I love a meander, so it's worked really, really well. Joe, thanks so much for joining us, and good luck, and we'll speak soon. And to all our listeners, thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like to find out more about Homeful and further details on how you can get involved, head to cih.org/homeful.